If I quickly review what we have done in the last class, we have seen the how the income distribution is shaped. Basically, the shape has a long right tail, which means that income is not evenly distributed, not symmetrically distributed. Basically, it has small number of people who have very high income, and lots of people have relatively lower income compared to those poor, rich people. And we talked about how the human capital can explain why the income distribution has that kind of shape. And then when we have looked at how to measure the degree of income inequality, and we have looked at Lorentz curve, okay, and Gini coefficient. And we also briefly talk about these other measures of inequality, like variance, coefficient of variation, and income ratio. We talked about income ratio, which is actually very common if you look at the data on income inequality. Okay? So today, what we are going to do is to look at the trend of income inequality and try to explain what happened. Okay? So let's look at first the trend of income inequality. Obviously, the absolute value of Gini coefficient itself is not that informative. Okay? So, we don't have like a clear criteria that which number is unequal, which number is equal. Okay? What is more important is look at actually across countries, for example, or across time. Okay? Especially looking at across time is quite important. And we will look at that right now. Okay, this is the Gini coefficients of Korea from 1990 to 2015. So it's about a quarter century. Okay, so this has it is measured for urban households with 2 or more persons. Okay, it's a bit restricted group of people. It excludes, let's say, rural, and excludes a household with only 1 person, which the proportion of those 1-person household is increasing nowadays. But we look at this because this one has the longest series of Gini coefficient. Now the Korean Statistical Office publishes Gini coefficients for more diverse groups. It includes like whole households. But for the past, in the past, they did not collect information about whole household. They looked at only urban households with 2 or more persons. Okay. So what we are looking at, this is early 1990s. So the orange one is after tax and transfers. We explained about this. These are disposable income, and then this bluish one is the before tax and transfers, market income. So this is how much they actually get. This is how much they can use after tax and transfers, the disposable income. Obviously, that disposable income should be more equally distributed than market income. So you can see the Gini coefficient is lower at any point of time. Okay, that should be expected. And what you can see here is that in early 1990s, Gini coefficient was around 0.25. Okay, and then you can see it has been increasing actually for quite long time. Up to around 2010, it has been increased. For about 20 years, Gini coefficient basically has been increasing. There has been ups and downs, but trend is clearly increasing Gini coefficient, which means increasing inequality. Okay? So what you can see here clearly that for at least from 1990 to 2010, the Korean income distribution has become more unequal. Okay? And then recently, interestingly, the Gini coefficient has been decreasing for the past 5 to 6 years. It's increasing that after the world economic crisis of 2008. It seems like Gini coefficient has been decreasing actually in Korea's case. And the big economic crisis of 1997, okay, 1998 of Korea has seen the huge jump in Gini coefficient, and then it dropped down a little bit, but it's obviously it's still much higher than the level before the crisis. Okay, but it's interesting that 2008 economic crisis, global economic crisis, actually has seen the opposite effect. Gini coefficient has been decreasing. Okay, and that's the thing. So basically what you can say is for the past 25 years, Gini coefficient has been increasing most of the time, and then it has decreased somewhat recently. Actually, it has decreased a lot for actually the disposable income. Okay, and then another interesting thing to look at is that the difference of Gini coefficient between these two incomes. In 1990s, it has been very close. It's not much of a difference between the Gini. But now the Gini coefficient has much wider difference. Okay, which means actually the disposable income compared to market income has become much more equal. Okay, so which means that basically it's the expansion of social welfare and expansion of transfer programs. Okay, must have contributed to making Gini coefficient much more equal. Okay. Tax rate, I don't think there is much difference in tax rate, but the transfer has increased a lot in Korea. So I think it has been contributing to making the Gini coefficient much lower of disposable income compared to that of market income. And so that's the trend. So general trend has been increasing, but recently has been decreasing. Okay, that's the trend. And this is another measure. It's not the Gini coefficient. It's 80-20 income ratio. So if you recall, the 80-20 income ratio is the income of 80th percentile divided by income of 20th percentile. Okay. So you can think of this as like a top 20%, bottom 20%. And as you can see that the shape is basically pretty much the same with the Gini coefficient. Okay, I mean it should be expected. Okay, it's just another way of measuring the inequality. And as you can see that in the 1990s, early 1990s, it's around 2.1. Okay. So it's like top 20%, bottom 20%. Top 20% has like at least at least twice as rich as the bottom 20%, and it has increased up to like 2.7 if you look at the market income, and then it has been decreasing, and then it's now around like 2.4. If you look at the disposable income, now it's around 2.2. Okay, disposable income is much more equal. Okay. So, but as I told you, that this is just sees that urban households with 2 or more persons. If you include, let's say, rural households, and if you include the households with 1 person, let's say, then actually picture becomes more unequal. Because the thing is that households with 1 person only is generally quite poor. So if you include poorer households here, then you will see the Gini coefficient got bigger. Okay, so I show you this only because it has a longer series in terms of data. But if you look at the Korean National Statistics website, and if you look at the measures of inequality, then you will see that the numbers for different types of households. Okay, but anyway, the trend should be look similar. Okay, basically, the Korean income distribution is now more unequal compared to, let's say, 25 years ago. Okay. Another thing to talk about here is that this is a household income, but when they measure the income, they do not necessarily measure the total income. Because the thing is, if you have more family members, okay, generally your income would be higher. Okay? So, for example, let's say there may be 2 owners or 3 owners in the household. Okay, so generally the bigger households is richer. Okay, in terms of their income. Okay, so when they calculate these income ratios, they actually adjust the income level by the number of household members. Okay, so this is like they say the equivalent income. Okay, so they remove the effect of the number of family members when they calculate the income. Okay, so that's how they do it. So if you use, for example, the only like a raw total income, it looks more unequal. Okay, because the bigger house, the richer households are generally bigger. Okay, so when they adjust it, the richer households' income get actually smaller when they calculate this. Okay? So you can think of this like something. They do not actually do that, but what they do is like a total income divided by total number of family members. So they kind of adjust the size of the household. So if you look at the raw data, okay, then it looks much more unequal. But when they calculate the Gini coefficient and other statistics, they adjust it so it actually number becomes smaller. Okay? So it's not something like they are trying to make the statistics more equal, but actually it's how they do it, internationally. So basically they use the same way of doing it basically across the countries in most of places. So people feel that that society has become more unequal, much more unequal than statistics shows. But in a way, that's true, because if you look at the raw data, it's much more unequal. And then when they publish it, actually they adjust the numbers. So that's how they do it. And next thing is that people feel like I said in the next week, Korea's income inequality, if you look at across countries, Korea's income inequality is not that high. Basically, when you look at the disposable income, it's like a middle of OECD countries. If you look at market income, it's most equal country among OECD countries. But people feel like a Korean income distribution is unequal in a way because the trend has been increasing. So when they look their past, more equal, let's say 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Okay, probably you don't remember 10 or 20 years ago. But let's say your parents will think that income distribution more equal, let's say 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And that's true. So people feel like it's more unequal now than, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago. Okay? So it's relatively became more unequal. Okay? So that's the thing. Now, we looked at the Korea's case, but how about the other countries? Okay, this is the from, I think, what is it from? This is from the OECD database. So this is the OECD country statistics, and it basically looking at the Gini coefficients, okay, 1985 and 2008. Okay, so it's about 20-year difference. Okay. So this is relatively, it's similar to the periods that we have seen, okay, in our Korean data. What does it tell us? Most countries, income distribution has become more unequal. Okay? So these are the countries that Gini coefficient has increased. These are the countries between 20 years. These are the countries that has basically no change. And these two countries, only two countries, has seen Gini coefficients drop a little bit. Turkey and Greece, Gini coefficients has dropped a little bit. France, Hungary, Belgium, basically the same. All the other countries has become more unequal. Mexico, US, Israel, UK, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, and whatever. The countries that you know most belong here. Okay. And interestingly, these Northern Europe countries has seen big increase in Gini coefficients, like Finland, Sweden, and these countries. Okay? So what does it tell us? Tell us that in most developed world, okay, income inequality has been increasing for the past, let's say, 20, 30 years. Okay? So all the statistics to show the same, basically. Okay? So it's no wonder the inequality is such a hot topic nowadays, because the most countries has seen that their society has become more unequal, not only in Korea. If you go to, let's say, US, if you go to Australia, if you go to Sweden, all of them feel like, the society has become more unequal. Okay? And this is also the similar thing. This is the share of top incomes. So share of top incomes, the share of top 1%. So what share? The top 1% income has the share of total income. This is a pre-tax income. So what does it show? United States has like highest share of top income earners. Okay. In 1990, it was around 13%. So 13% of total income is incurred to top 1% of the total households. Now it's like about more than 18%, 19%. So in 2007, so it's probably even higher nowadays. Okay, and not only the United States, UK, Canada, and other countries as well. Basically, no country has seen the falling share of top earners. So Netherlands, Sweden, also Norway has increased a lot. Denmark, Finland, interesting. Okay, and Switzerland, Ireland. Okay, so you have seen that a lot of countries have seen actually quite a big increase of share of top income earners. Okay. So, is there Korea? No, I don't think there is Korea here. Okay. Anyway, so what it tells us is that basically the world has become more unequal. And when you look at only, let's say, developed parts of the world, okay, we don't know much about the rest. Okay, so what you have seen, basically what you have seen is rising income inequality. Okay, so income inequality has risen for the past 20 years or 25 years or 30 years. Now, some countries it's even more longer than that. And why? Okay, actually that's a big question. Why it has increased? Okay, so today we are going to look at the explanations that seems most relevant to Korea's case. Okay. In some other countries, they may have different explanations. Okay. But we're going to look at the three explanations that seems to be more relevant to Korea's case. And then actually there are some other explanations that are not seem to be that relevant to Korea's case. I will explain it later about them. Okay, so let's first look at how should we approach this explanation issue. Now, actually, using economics, we can actually think of the reasons why it can happen. Okay, this is just the demand and supply schedule. Okay, the economics tells us that the income or wage level should be determined in the market. Okay. And specifically, how the demand and supply looks like. Okay, so what it here is that we just use a little different type of wage and little different type of employment. Okay, this is the relative wage. So skilled wage divided by unskilled wage. Okay, so this is a so skilled wage by unskilled wage. Okay, when it goes up, then basically the wage distribution or income distribution has become more unequal. When it goes down, it becomes more equal. Okay, and then this is just the number of skilled workers divided by number of unskilled workers. Okay, so this is relative wage of skilled workers, and this is relative employment of skilled workers. And then we have a supply and demand curve. Okay. So supply curve has positive slope, which means that when the skilled wage increases relative to unskilled wage, okay, then there will be more skilled workers relative to unskilled workers willing to supply labor. Okay? And demand curve has negative slope means that relatively skilled wage higher than relatively less demand for skilled workers. Okay? So it should be, it looks like a normal supply demand curve. Okay? So basically what we are looking at is this height. Okay? So let's think of let's say before any change, let's say E0. So S0, D0, E0 is, let's say, the starting point. Okay. Now, what can you look at? Okay, what we can look at is that how can you make skilled wage relative to unskilled wage to go up? Okay. One way of doing it is, let's say, how about supply curve shift to the left? Okay. Let's say there is a relatively, okay, overall, okay, less supply of skilled workers relative to unskilled workers. Okay. Then supply curve shift to the left, and this whole thing will go up. Right? So one way of doing it is that you just have lower supply of skilled workers. So lower supply of skilled workers will make more unequal income distribution. Another way of doing it is demand curve to the right, okay? And more demand for skilled workers will make relative wage to increase. Okay? So we can explain what happens using the supply and demand story. Okay? Now then, let's think what happened actually. Okay. Think of the supply. Let's look at the supply side of skilled workers. Okay. Think of skilled workers. Now, how do you know who's skilled or not skilled? Actually, one way of looking at it is that what is the, let's say, the education level of the workers. Okay. So skilled workers are generally better educated than unskilled workers. So if we say that supply of skilled workers has decreased, which probably means that there is relatively less supply of, let's say, well-educated workers in the labor market. Is it true or not? What do you think? Do we have fewer educated workers or more educated workers? More educated workers, right? So if you look at, let's say, education level of Korean population is the number and the ratio of people with post-secondary education. Post-secondary just means that the secondary school up to high school. So post-secondary is that more than high school education. And if you look at the proportion of people with post-secondary education, from 1966, it was, if you look at this number, this is O ratio, it was actually quite low, okay? Less than 10%, 5% probably. Now it's 2000 census, so this must be 2005. And it's about 2005 or 2010. Yeah. It's 45%. Okay? What does it tell us? Basically, what it tells us is that we have actually increasing supply of skilled workers, not the decreasing supply of skilled workers. Not only in our country, actually most countries, if you look at most countries, the education level of population has been increasing over time, which means actually supply curve shift to the right, not left, right? So from S0 to S1, then if the demand curve didn't change, then we should have seen actually fall of relative wage, not increase of relative wage from E0 to E1. So then what should be the story? The story should be the increasing demand for the skilled workers. Okay? So demand side, if you have, let's say, large shift of demand curve, then you can actually see that E0 to E2. Okay? So relatively more unequal. Okay? So the explanation of rising income inequality in economics actually has focused on what happened to the demand side, not the supply side. Because supply side seems to be pretty obvious. Okay? It's been increasing. But there is some supply side story, but it's not that primary explanation. So the primary reason should be the increase in the demand. Okay? Then what can actually make the increase of demand? Okay? Basically, it's a relative demand. Okay? First, okay, so this is what we talk about. First explanation we look at is the international trade. Now, what we know is trade, international trade or globalization, okay, has happened for the past 30 years. I mean, it's not exactly happened. It's the globalization has become more important for the last 30 years. Okay. So the simple story actually you can make from international trade, the story like goes something like this, like we have cheaper imports, okay, from, let's say, outside countries, let's say from China, for example, okay, from other undeveloped countries, okay, then the people who make cheaper goods in this country, okay, will lose jobs, something like that, okay. So that's a simple story, but actually we can use an economic model and then we can explain what happens, okay. So see what happens. I mean, that's a Stolper-Samuelson theorem. Okay, that's the story is actually if you know well about the international trade, actually pretty simple model. So let's look at this. Okay, so what it basically this theorem tells us is in the international trade, each country should export goods, the production of which demands relatively intensive use factors of which is, okay, the relative urban supply. What it means is that international trade leads to specialization. Then what kind of products you will specialize, okay? You will specialize in products, okay, that you can make well, okay? For example, if you have relatively skilled group of workers, then you will specialize in making those goods that uses lots of skilled workers. And if you have a relatively abundant supply of unskilled workers, then you will specialize in the making goods that uses that unskilled workers. Let's say, cheaper products. And then if you have skilled workers, let's say you probably make machines or some high quality products. Okay? And if there is no international trade, your country, you should make both goods. Okay? The goods that uses unskilled workers, goods that uses skilled workers. Okay? But once you have a trade, okay, let's say you have a trade with a country that has large supply of unskilled workers, okay, your trading partner will specialize in making goods that uses unskilled workers. And then they can make it actually much cheaper than you do, right? And then you will specialize in making goods that uses skilled workers. And then you trade. Okay? We know all the theory that there is a gains from trade, so both countries will benefit. But still, the problem here is that the country, let's say, if you have, then now that you will specialize in, from developed countryside, you will specialize in making goods that uses skilled workers. Unskilled workers will lose jobs because there is basically now less demand for unskilled workers. Or you can say the relatively more demand for skilled workers. So that fits the story that it shifts the demand curve to the right, relative demand for skilled workers. Because with international trade, if you are developed country, then you will see that skilled workers will have higher relative demand. So by the reason their relative wage or relative income will increase, so more income inequality. Okay? So that's the story goes, basically. You know? So developing countries export goods that use unskilled workers intensively, and developed countries export goods that use skilled workers intensively. Basically, if you look at international trade volume, let's say, between, let's say, 1990s or between 1980s and 2000, then you see much more volume trading happens in 2000 than in, let's say, 1980s. Okay? So if you use this theory and then and then you think of income inequality, basically fits whole thing. International trade has made a specialization happen, and the specialization makes increases relative demand for skilled workers, and then increase income inequality. Okay? That's the whole story, basically. Okay, so that's the Stolper-Simon's theorem. Okay. If we actually look at the more formal model, let's say in the closed, think of the economy that has no trade, and 3 goods are produced. Think of 3 goods: final good for consumption and 2 intermediate goods, and H and L. Okay, and these 2 intermediate goods are used to make a final good. And intermediate good, H is produced by high-skilled labor and L by low-skilled labor. So there are 2 types of intermediate goods. Okay. So then production function of intermediate goods is simple. Let's say Yi is just equals Ni. Okay. So one person makes 1 good. Okay. So one high-skilled worker makes one product H, and one low-skilled worker makes 1 product L. Okay, makes it really simple. So Yi is the output of intermediate good. Okay, get it? So Pi is the price of intermediate good I, and Wi is the wage of factor I. Okay. Okay, let's think of production function of a final good. Okay, so production function of final good basically uses intermediate good H and intermediate good L. Okay, and then makes final good for consumption. There is one important assumption is this production function is constant returns to scale. Okay, like a Cope-Douglas production function. Constant returns to scale just means that if you double of each intermediate good, okay, then your final product will be doubled. Okay, so if this is the definition of constant returns to scale. If you double your inputs, then your output will be doubled. Okay, so Cope-Douglas function is a very well-known constant returns to scale function. And Cope-Douglas function seems to explain quite well overall production function, actually, of a country. Anyway, so this is the Cope-Douglas the function, production function. And this production function is actually has an interesting property. Okay, and actually each homogeneous function, each homogeneous production function has interesting property. The thing is, marginal product is homogeneous of degree 0. If a production function is homogeneous of degree n, and its marginal product is homogeneous of degree n-1. Haven't heard about it? You should have heard about it. Okay? It's a simple theory of production function in microeconomics. If you have homogeneous production function, homogeneous of degree 1, and when you take a marginal product, it's homogeneous of degree 0. Homogeneous of degree 2, the marginal product becomes homogeneous of degree 1. Okay? That's well known. I mean, it's a mathematical property. It's pretty simple mathematical property. what it means is, basically what it means, it's a marginal product of, let's say, high-skilled good. Okay? FH is the marginal product of high-skilled good. Okay? Even if you double both inputs, this marginal product will not change. Okay? So if you put one more H into production, then what you get is this FH, let's say. Okay? And then if you both doubled, and when you put one more, then you will still get the same. Okay? And FL is basically the same. FL is also, the marginal product of L is homogeneous of degree 0. Okay? And marginal product of intermediate good must be decreasing, obviously. And we assume the price of the final good is just 1. It's a numeraire, so it's 1. And all markets are perfectly competitive. So there are two important assumptions. One is production function is constant returns to scale. Another one is markets are perfectly competitive. Okay? Then what happens? Okay, what happens here is, because the market is perfectly competitive, okay, each producer will have 0 profit. Okay? And 0 profit just means that the profit comes from, because each intermediate good producer, okay, their revenue for intermediate good producer is PIYI, right? Minus WINI, right? This is the, how much they get by selling their intermediate good, and this is how much they pay, okay, for the intermediate to hire a worker, okay. And what we know is that because the production function looks like that, so this should be NI, right? So it is 0. No, not the total rev. Sorry, this should be profit. Okay, and because perfectly competitive market, the profit must be 0, which means PI must be equal to WI. Okay, so if you have a perfectly competitive market, in this case, okay, the price of the final intermediate good product must be equal to the wage they pay to pay the workers to make that one. Okay? So that's what it means here. Okay, WI should be equals to PI. Okay, and a competitive representative firm producing the final good serves basically this equation, right? Okay, this is a profit. Okay, so FYH, this is how much they make, and we say the price of the final good is 1, so this is the total revenue, and their cost is PHYH plus PLYL, so this is the one. Okay, and then, okay, what do we know? WH, okay, think of H, okay, only high-skilled good, high-skilled worker. High-skilled workers, WH, should be equal to PH. Okay, that's what it says in this line. Okay, and then from this profit maximizing condition, PH should be equal to the marginal product of YH for the final good producer. So that is FH, YH, YL. Okay, so this is from the profit maximization over here. Okay. This is the marginal cost, and this is the marginal revenue. Then they should be equal. Okay? So this is the marginal product of YH, or you can say the marginal revenue they get from using one more YH. Now, what is the last thing? The last thing is, okay, because this is homogeneous of degree 0, which means when you actually times t and times t, still it doesn't change anything. Okay? What you do here is you divide this inside by YL. Okay? So YH divided by YL, and this becomes 1. Okay? Get it? And YH, YL is basically NH, NL because of the production function. Okay? Got that? YH equals NH, YL equals NL. So you think of this NH and L, and you just divide these both by NL, and it doesn't change anything. Okay? You know what I mean? We said FH, TYH, TYL equals FH, YH, YL. This is homogeneous degree 0. Okay? Because since we assume the product function is homogeneous degree 1, this should be true. Okay? So and then we just make t is just equal to 1 over YL. Okay? We can pick any t. Actually, it doesn't matter. And then it basically, when you do it, then you become this and then NH over NL. Okay, now what is significant? Actually, what it shows us is WH at the end will depend on NH over NL. Okay? What determines the high-skilled workers' wage? Basically, it is determined by relative number of high-skilled workers to low-skilled workers in the economy. Okay? So when the high-skilled workers relatively become abundant, let's say high-skilled workers number increases, okay? Then this whole thing will become bigger. When it gets bigger, then this whole thing become smaller. Okay? Because marginal product of YH is negative. I mean, it's decreasing. Okay? So when this part goes up, then this whole thing will go down. So that makes sense. If you have relatively more high-skilled workers compared to low-skilled workers, high-skilled wage will be lower. Okay? And then if you have relatively fewer high-skilled workers compared to low-skilled workers, then high-skilled wage will be higher. Higher. Okay? And it becomes smaller, and this whole thing will get bigger. So this WH will go up. Okay? So if you assume, when you go back, if you assume constant returns to scale production function, perfectly competitive market, then NH, YH equals NH, it's not that important assumption actually. And it becomes more complex, but it's not that important. So what it means is basically this. High-skilled workers' wage will be determined by relative number of high-skilled workers to low-skilled workers. So when the relatively high-skilled workers become more abundant, okay, then high-skilled workers' wage will go down. And when you have relatively fewer high-skilled workers compared to low-skilled workers, relative wage of high-skilled workers will go up. Pretty intuitive, okay? And you can show it actually using this model. That's what it says. Now, when you introduce open economy, okay, when you introduce trade with no barriers, no tariff or no rules or whatsoever, so open economy, okay, what happens? Okay, so we assume the rest of the world, third assumption, the rest of the world has the same technology. Okay, so each country has basically the same technology. Okay, so we share the technology. Okay, And so the rest of the world, let's say, has high-skilled labor and low-skilled labor in quantities MH, ML. Foreign countries have, let's say, whole thing MH and ML. So basically, if you think of it, there are only two countries. So we have country N, right, and country M, okay? Country M has MH and ML. And then the whole thing basically the same as country N. Okay, they look the same, okay, but just N and M are different. Okay? And when we have trade, then we have global equilibrium, right? And if you have a global equilibrium, basically it's pretty much the same because basically you add those two countries up and then what happens? Now the high-skilled workers' wage will be determined at the global level, not the local level. And this one will be determined by what? Relative number of high-skilled workers in the globe, okay, to the number of low-skilled workers, okay, in the whole world. Okay. Now, what matters is not only your relative number of high-skilled workers. What matters is now the other countries' relative numbers will matter to you as well. Okay, get that? It makes total sense, right? So what matters is not only your country, but the whole world, your trading partners. And so that's the theory. Now, if you look at it, actually it can make our argument pretty easy. If NH plus MH is smaller than NL plus ML. Okay, so let's make a pretty much like a pretty simple assumption. Let's say your trading partner, let's say our trading partner, let's say our country is N, and then trading partner is M. Let's assume they have no high-skilled workers. Okay? Let's say they have only low-skilled workers. Or you can say they have very few high-skilled workers, but mostly low-skilled workers. Then what happens? What happens is basically this number will become smaller, right? And then this whole thing will go up. Okay? So what does it mean? It means income distribution will be more unequal, right? Okay? So what this theorem tells us? This theorem tells us that given these assumptions, okay, of the model, if a country engages in international trade with a country that has relatively abundant supply of low-skilled workers, okay, then this country will experience increasing income inequality. Okay? Get that? That's what it is. Okay? So, okay, now we have looked at the model and then the model predicts that exactly. And it seems like it can explain what happens to income inequality. So the theory goes, we have seen the increase of trade, okay, between, let's say, developed world and developing world. And then as that trade has expanded, okay, the developed countries basically will see globally more supply of low-skilled workers. Okay? And at the end, high-skilled workers' wage will increase. Okay? So even though the supply of high-skilled workers locally has increased, okay, but when you look at the global level, actually, supply of low-skilled workers has increased at the global level. Okay? So then what is the limitation, actually? We have looked at the model, but this model is actually a very classical model of international trade, and it has certain limitations. One is that all goods must be traded, okay? And then the markets are perfectly competitive, and the technologies are constant returns to scale, okay? And countries have access to the same technologies, okay? So there are crucial 4 assumptions here. Everything is traded. Markets are competitive. Constant returns to scale technology. And then same technology shared by all the trading countries. Okay. So if the conclusion obviously may differ if the assumptions are not all met. For example, if the rest of the world has more abundant but less efficient low-skilled labor, so our low-skilled labor is more efficient than, let's say, their low-skilled labor. Okay? Then our low-skilled workers actually can have increasing wage. Okay? Basically, what we are saying is that our low-skilled workers is not same as your low-skilled workers. Our low-skilled workers are actually high-skilled workers compared to your low-skilled workers. Okay? Then things can different. Basically, actually, in the international trade, the people study international trade actually look at this one actually for quite a long time, because this argument that international trade has increased income inequality is actually quite a it seems like very intuitive, and this has a long history actually in economics. This argument has a very long history. So there has been lots of studies about actually this particular implication of the model, and then they basically think the model may be wrong because this assumption is not right, and that assumption is not right. So if you're interested in international trade, and the international trade people actually look at all these assumptions, and then they do all different models. But anyway, so we are not that interested in international trade models, but basically what we can learn from here is that, in short, international trade has a potential to increase income inequality in developed countries. Okay? That's basically, the short summary of what we have done so far. Okay, so what are the empirical evidence shows? Actually, empirical evidence shows that increasing trade with developed countries did deepen income inequality in developed countries. Okay? And there has been some controversy about these studies, but nowadays it seems that the consensus goes that international trade did increase income inequality. Okay? Can it explain every increase of income inequality? No, it's not likely that it can increase whole thing, but it can increase some portion of increasing income inequality. Okay, this international trade. Okay, there are a few studies about Korea's case, and we look at, it's actually Korea's studies have looked at the trade with China. Why? Because Korea has had no formal diplomatic relationship with China until early 1990s. I think the Korea-Chinese diplomatic relationship was normalized in 1993 or 94 or something like that. Okay, I forgot. Actually, I don't remember at all. But it's in early 1990s. Okay, and then international trade with China was basically nothing up to, let's say, 1980s. 1980s, we had no trade. 1990s, we had started trading with China, and it has increased so much. So if you look at the trading volume with China, its number one trading partner of Korea is now China. It has been number one for quite some time nowadays. Okay, so it could be a coincidence, but increasing income inequality has coincided with the increasing trade with China. So in Korea's case, they look at what happens. They look at whether the trade with China can explain increasing inequality. I mean, that's a natural starting point. Actually, not only in Korea. Actually, in most developed countries, they close look at the trade with China, because the appearance of China in international trade is such a big change in international trade, actually, for the past, let's say, 30 years. So it's no wonder that they look at the trade with China very closely. Okay, so some studies have looked at it, and then what they actually showed is First thing, wage inequality has increased after the tariff had been lowered. So tariff goes down, then they look at the wage inequality has increased a little bit, and then the wages are more unequal in industry with higher exports to China. Okay, so it seems like there is some evidence that supports that increasing international trade has increased income inequality. But can it explain everything? No, hardly. Okay, it can explain small portion, but not that much. Okay. Questions? Okay, now let's look at the second explanation. Second explanation is also suggested by popular literature in the sense that it's easy to understand. Okay, immigration. Okay, so the story basically, in short, goes we have more unskilled immigrants coming in from other countries. Okay, then we have so many unskilled workers here, and they are competing with immigrants, so their wage go down. So that's the whole, that's basically the essence of the story. Now, why we look at immigration in Korea's case? Because number of immigrants working in Korea has increased so much. So in early 1990s, we didn't have much immigrants. Okay. But as you can see that it has been increasing so much, especially like around from early 2000s. Okay. So now it's more than 1 million. These are the number of registered foreign residents. Okay. So these are the number of people basically who are staying in Korea for at least a year. So they have to register as a foreigner. And then it includes like students also, not only workers. It includes students like diplomats and all these people. But anyway, if you look at it, what it shows is a huge increase in number of foreigners living in Korea. In 1990s, it was so few, actually way less than 100,000 people. Okay? It was very rare, during that time, it was very rare to see a foreigner actually on the street. Actually, I mean, if I remember correctly, I don't think I have seen, I think on campus, for example, we didn't have many foreign students, probably, I don't know, very small number. But now we have more than 1 million, okay? And the story goes, if most of the immigrants are, let's say, low-skilled workers, it can actually have potential to press down the low-skilled wage. Okay, if you look at these people, 29% are here for work. Okay, so 30 seems to be that much. Okay, so that is about 330,000 people, and these foreigners, employed registered foreigners. So employed registered foreigners in Korea, we have about 271,000. Okay, and 80% of them are low-skilled workers. Okay, so what it means is we have more than 200,000 foreign low-skilled workers working in Korea. Okay, so that could be impact on low-skilled wage. Okay.
Where are most of them coming from? From which countries?
Various countries. Lots of them are actually from China. The thing is, China has a big population of ethnic Koreans living in China, so they moved to China in early 20th century. Okay, so there are lots of ethnic Koreans living in China. So they have a special. We have a special rule for ethnic Koreans Chinese with Chinese nationality. So they are much. Yeah, so they have much easier to get visa, working visa in Korea. So a lot of them are ethnic Koreans with Chinese nationality, but it's not at all. So we have quite a few. No, we don't have, but we have a lot of people from, let's say, Southeast Asia, like Bangladesh, or Mongolia also. We have a quite strong presence of Mongolians. So mostly Asians, basically. If you're interested, you can look at actually the Korean Statistical Office website and Department of Justice website, and then you see all the distribution of their original country. Okay, so that's what it is. So the potential is we have, let's say, large number of low-skilled immigrants, then it can make things little difficult for unskilled workers. We have a simple model. Let's say this is before any inflow of immigrants. So this is domestic supply of low-skilled workers, and this is labor demand. Okay? And then low-skilled workers got W0. And then what? We have supply of low-skilled workers from outside the country. So total supply just shift to the right. So W0 goes down to W1. Okay? It's a simple story. Okay. And actually with W1, number of natives working in this country is actually changed from ON0 to ON2. Okay? Because wage goes down, then the domestic supply is at point B. Okay? So total supply is N1, but N1, N2 are immigrants. N2O are natives. Okay? So wage goes down. Okay? So that's a simple story. If the foreign low-skilled workers and domestic low-skilled workers are perfect substitutes, from employer's point of view, basically they are the same. Okay? Then actually we said that supply of high-skilled workers has increased, but if we add, let's say, immigrants, actually we may have seen actual increase of low-skilled workers. Okay, not the high-skilled workers, relatively. Okay? So that's the story. Okay? That's just what I explained. Okay, so, oh yeah, then high-skilled workers, then what happens to high-skilled workers' wage? It's not that actually simple, actually, if you look at the more detail, because I said that low-skilled workers will fall, but what happens to high-skilled workers' wage? Actually, depending on how the high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers are substitutes or complements, high-skilled wage may increase or decrease. Because if they are, let's say, high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers are substitutes, low-skilled workers become cheaper, okay, because there are so many. Then employer wants to substitute, right, low-skilled workers for high-skilled workers. So high-skilled workers, demand for high-skilled workers will fall also, okay. So the high-skilled wage will fall also, okay. So, but if they are complements, okay, then high-skilled workers will increase. Okay, that's the story, but does it make sense? Okay, it seems like intuitively seems like it makes sense, but this first argument, I will explain this later, okay? This is about skill development. So I will explain this later, okay, tomorrow, not today. So there is a counter-argument 1, there is a counter-argument 2. Counter-argument 2 is the international trade. We have international trade. So immigration should not have much impact. Okay? So if immigration has some impact, it should be just international trade pretty much can explain what happens to income inequality with globalization. So low-skilled workers should have little or no effect on wage inequality. Because equilibrium relative wage is determined by global labor market condition. Okay? It doesn't matter in a way that where the workers are. Okay? Say if you have a lot of international trade, okay, the location of workers should matter much. So even if we have lots of immigrants, it should not affect lower skilled wage much. Okay. Now, what about the empirical studies? Okay, the empirical studies actually show, mostly from the US, immigration of low-skilled workers is not likely to have much impact anyway. Okay? If they have impact, it's very small. Okay? So immigration seems to be a little intuitive explanation, but it turns out when you look at actual data closely, it's not that important. And then in Korea's case, some actual studies say that actually the foreign and native workers are not substitutes. Okay? So since they are not substitutes, immigration should not affect much of the native workers. It may actually help native workers to earn higher wages. Okay? So immigration may be a plausible explanation when you look at the simple theoretical point of view, but in reality, it does not seem to be that important. Okay? Questions? Okay, so our plan is tomorrow we will finish this. And this, our midterm will include this one as well. Okay? So I will tell you tomorrow. Okay, then that's it for today.